Amy Winehouse froze mid-stage, dropped her microphone to her side, and turned toward the crowd. 30,000 people held their breath. No one knew what was about to happen. The Hammersmith Apollo in London was packed beyond capacity that June evening in 2008. Every seat filled, every aisle crammed with bodies, the air thick with anticipation and sweat. Amy Winehouse was halfway through, back to black, when something impossible cut through the roar of the crowd. A voice. Pure, broken, desperate. Singing her words back to her from somewhere deep in the darkness of row M. She stopped. The band kept playing for 3 more seconds before realizing their frontwoman had gone completely still. The bass dropped out first. Then drums. Then guitar. Silence swallowed the arena like a wave crashing over stone. Amy's hand trembled as she lowered the microphone. Her iconic beehive swayed slightly as she turned her head, scanning the ocean of faces below her. Her eyes, rimmed with that unmistakable heavy liner, were wide. Searching. The crowd murmured, confused, some thinking it was part of the show. But those in the first few rows saw something else in her expression. Recognition. Pain. Connection. Because what Amy Winehouse heard in that voice wasn't just a fan singing along. It was something far more devastating. The voice belonged to a woman named Sarah Mitchell, though Amy didn't know her name yet. Sarah was 26 years old, standing in the middle of a sea of strangers, tears streaming down her face, singing words she had tattooed on her ribcage 2 years earlier. Words that had kept her alive when nothing else could. "We only said goodbye with words, I died 100 times. Sarah's voice cracked on the word. Died, but she kept going. She wasn't performing. She was surviving. And somehow, through the chaos of 30,000 people, through the lights and the smoke and the noise, Amy Winehouse heard her. Security guards near the stage exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. The venue manager backstage reached for his radio. The audience began to whisper, louder now, a growing buzz of confusion spreading like electricity through the crowd. Amy raised one hand, silencing everyone. The gesture was small but absolute. Then she did something no one expected. She walked to the very edge of the stage, crouched down, and pointed directly into the crowd. "You," she said, her voice raw through the microphone she'd brought back to her lips. "Keep singing." The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Some gasped. A few people started crying without knowing why. But Sarah Mitchell, standing in row M, seat 14, felt her legs almost give out beneath her. She had come to this concert with money she didn't have, bought the ticket with a credit card she couldn't pay off, told herself it didn't matter because she wasn't planning to be around much longer anyway. The bottle of pills in her jacket pocket felt heavy. The note she'd written that morning was folded in her jeans. She had come to hear Amy Winehouse one last time before she disappeared. And now Amy Winehouse was looking directly at her. What happened next would be talked about for years, shared in forums, debated by fans, and remembered by everyone in that arena as the moment they saw something bigger than music. Sarah's voice shook as she continued singing. The crowd around her fell silent, creating a pocket of space, a cathedral of attention. Amy stayed crouched at the edge of the stage, nodding slowly, her own eyes filling with tears. When Sarah reached the chorus, Amy joined her. Not overpowering, not performing. Harmonizing. Two voices, one broken and raw from the crowd, one legendary and scarred from the stage, blending into something neither had alone. The band, understanding now what was happening, began playing softly behind them. Just guitar and bass, gentle and stripped down, making space for the two voices to breathe. People in the audience began to cry. Not because the singing was perfect. It wasn't. It was messy and human and aching. They cried because they recognized that sound. The sound of someone barely holding on, finding another person who understood. When the song ended, the silence lasted 5 full seconds. An eternity in a room that size. Then Amy stood up, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her liner, and spoke into the microphone. "What's your name, love?" "Sarah," came the small voice from the crowd. "Sarah," Amy repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Sarah, I need you to come up here. The crowd exploded. Security guards moved immediately, parting the sea of people to create a path. Sarah stood frozen, shaking her head, but the people around her were already guiding her forward, hands on her back, voices encouraging her. It's okay. Go. Go. She stumbled through the crowd, her vision blurred with tears, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. When she reached the front, 2 security guards lifted her carefully onto the stage. Her legs barely worked. The lights were blinding. The crowd was deafening. And then Amy Winehouse was in front of her, real and small and human, smelling like cigarettes and perfume, with eyes that looked like they'd seen the same darkness Sarah knew too well. Amy didn't say anything at first. She just looked at Sarah, really looked at her, the way someone looks when they're trying to see past the surface into the truth underneath. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. She took one out, lit it, took a drag, and handed it to Sarah. Here, Amy said quietly, just for her, though the microphone caught it. You look like you need this more than I do. The crowd laughed softly, the tension breaking just enough to let everyone breathe. Sarah took the cigarette with shaking hands. She didn't smoke, hadn't in 3 years, but she took it anyway because it felt like being handed a lifeline. Subscribe now if you want to see how this moment changed everything. The most powerful part is still coming. Amy turned back to the band and said something the microphone didn't catch. The guitarist nodded. The bassist adjusted his strap. Then Amy turned to Sarah. You know Valerie? Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Good. Sing it with me. And don't you dare hold back. The music started. Upbeat, joyful, completely different from the heaviness of the moment before. Amy counted Sarah in with a nod, and they began together. Sarah's voice was shaky at first, but Amy kept looking at her, kept nodding, kept smiling in that crooked way she had, and slowly, Sarah's voice grew stronger. She forgot about the 30,000 people watching. She forgot about the pills in her pocket, and the note in her jeans. She forgot about everything except the music and the woman next to her who seemed to understand without needing to be told. They sang the whole song. When it ended, the crowd was on its feet, roaring, screaming, crying, clapping so hard the sound was like thunder. Amy hugged Sarah, a real hug, tight and long, and whispered something in her ear that no microphone caught, something just for Sarah. When they pulled apart, Amy kept hold of Sarah's hand and raised it in the air like a champion. The crowd roared louder. Sarah was sobbing, openly and unashamedly, but she was smiling too, a smile she didn't know she was still capable of. Amy walked Sarah back to the edge of the stage where security was waiting to help her down. But before she let go, Amy pulled a black Sharpie from her pocket and grabbed Sarah's arm. She wrote something quickly on Sarah's wrist, then capped the marker and pressed it into Sarah's palm. Keep that, Amy said. And call someone tonight. Promise me. Sarah looked down at her wrist. In smudged black ink, Amy had written a phone number and 2 words. Stay here. But the story doesn't end there. What Amy did after that show would reveal the depth of her humanity in a way few people ever knew. After the concert, Amy refused to leave the venue until she'd spoken with Sarah again. Her manager protested, said they were already late for the next city, but Amy waved him off and sat in her dressing room, still in her stage dress, makeup smeared, waiting. When Sarah was brought backstage, still shaking, still holding the cigarette Amy had given her like a sacred object, Amy stood up and pulled out a chair. Sit, she said simply. They sat together for 40 minutes. No cameras. No press. Just 2 women talking in a small room that smelled like hairspray and old carpet. What they said stayed between them, but when Sarah left that night, she left without the bottle of pills. She'd given it to Amy, who'd thrown it in the trash without ceremony. You don't need those anymore, Amy had said. You've got something better now. What's that? Sarah asked. A reason to see what comes next. Sarah kept the cigarette. Never smoked it. Kept it in a small box with the Sharpie marker and a ticket stub from that night. Years later, after Amy was gone, Sarah would tell interviewers that she still had them. That she looked at them whenever the darkness came back. That they reminded her of the night a stranger saw her, really saw her, and decided she was worth saving. Share this story if you believe in the power of human connection. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind us why music matters. The footage from that night spread quickly online. Shaky cell phone videos from a dozen different angles, all showing the same thing: Amy Winehouse stopping her show, finding a voice in the crowd, and bringing a stranger on stage to sing. But what the videos couldn't capture was the why. The look in Amy's eyes. The weight of the moment. The way both women were holding on to each other like lifelines in a storm. Music journalists called it a publicity stunt. Cynics said it was staged. But anyone who was there, anyone who saw it happen in real time, knew better. You can't fake that kind of recognition. That kind of pain meeting pain and deciding, just for a moment, to be less alone together. Amy Winehouse died 3 years later. July 23, 2011. The world mourned a talent gone too soon, a voice that could break your heart, and put it back together in the same breath. But for Sarah Mitchell, the loss was personal in a different way. She'd lost a person who'd saved her life without even knowing her name first. At Amy's funeral, Sarah wasn't there. She couldn't afford the trip to London, couldn't get time off work, couldn't face the crowds and the cameras. But she stood in her apartment in Manchester, holding that unsmoked cigarette, and played Back to Black on repeat until she couldn't cry anymore. Years later, Sarah would say that Amy gave her more than a moment on stage. She gave her proof that being seen matters. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop, really stop, and pay attention to the person who's barely holding on. Sarah went on to become a crisis counselor. She works at a suicide prevention hotline now, taking calls from people in their darkest moments. On her desk, next to her computer and her notes, sits a framed photo from that night. It's blurry, taken from someone's phone in the crowd, but you can see both of them on stage, Amy's arm around Sarah's shoulder, both of them singing. When Sarah trains new volunteers, she tells them about that night. She tells them that sometimes people don't need advice or solutions or platitudes. Sometimes they just need someone to stop and say, "I see you. I hear you. You matter." Amy's mother, Janice, reached out to Sarah 2 years after Amy's death. They met for coffee in a quiet cafe in North London. Janice told Sarah that Amy had talked about that night often. That she'd kept a newspaper clipping about it in her journal. That she'd said it was one of the only times she felt like her fame meant something real. She struggled so much, Janice said, tears in her eyes. But that night, she was exactly who she was meant to be. Sarah still has the cigarette, though it's crumbled to almost nothing now, just flakes of tobacco in a sealed plastic case. She has the marker, dried out and useless, but kept anyway. And she has something else too. A voicemail Amy left her 3 weeks before she died. Sarah had called the number Amy wrote on her wrist, just once, a week after the concert. She didn't expect anyone to answer. But Amy did. They talked for 20 minutes. Amy asked how she was doing, if she was okay, if she'd talked to someone. At the end of the call, Amy said, "Ring me if it gets bad again, yeah? Anytime. I mean it." Sarah never called again. She didn't want to bother her. But Amy called once more, 3 weeks before the end, and left a message when Sarah didn't pick up. "Hey, it's Amy. Just checking in. Hope you're doing alright. Remember what I said. You've got something better now. Don't forget that." Sarah plays that voicemail once a year, on July 23rd, and cries every single time. The cigarette, the marker, the ticket stub, and a transcript of that voicemail are now in a small museum exhibit about Amy Winehouse's life, donated by Sarah with a note that reads, "She saw me when I was invisible. She stayed when I was ready to leave. This is my thank you." The night Amy Winehouse stopped her show wasn't the night she became a legend. She was already that. It was the night she became something more. Human. Broken. Beautiful. Real. And sometimes, that's the only thing that can save someone. This story is a dramatized narrative inspired by true events. It is a work of fiction for entertainment purposes only.